بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. I would like to give great thanks and express gratitude for inviting me over to this great place. And I think it's becoming quite competitive now to lure you into another enjoyable session when you have mentioned 3 other sessions previously have gone in a structured way of reflecting on the best of books that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed through the seal of the prophets sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I have chosen the best of narratives as well as the theme for tonight's talk. Now it might go Egyptians in a historical milestone to start as where the story of Joseph has been witnessed in one version or another. So when we talk about the story itself, we're talking about a plot, we're talking about characters, we're talking about themes, we're talking about scenes. A telling is reported stories through verbal communication from one generation to another. Hence, if it gets documented on paper, generations can go back and read what has been written 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, etc. If it hasn't been written, it all depends on memory and how people reflect upon a story when they do a retelling. Dad, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy on his soul and all those who have passed away, would tell stories. I try to tell the same stories to my kids. Definitely different. Even if I try to mimic what he has said from A to Z for a particular story. I have my style, I have my vocabulary items, I have my structure of how I recall the story and how Dad reported it to me when I was 5 or 10 or 15. If he has retold the story to me 10 years later, it wouldn't have been the same. It would have been still different. So we talk about a telling and a retelling. Point of entry to tonight's lecture is there an original copy of a story? We talk about the story of Joseph in the Quran. Is that an original? Can we dare say there were narratives related to Joseph, his brothers, his parents, languages and cultures as well? Some people would say Yusuf and some people would say Yusuf. Which one is most accurate? Well, we go to Quranic way of doing it. Yusufu ayyuha as-siddiq. So it has dhamma, right? But Joseph might have affected our pronunciation in Arabic when we think Yusuf. These little things do make a difference of a retelling of the same story that is there from one group to another, from one generation to another, from one culture to another. So ancient Egyptians had a similar scene to what has happened when the wife of Al-Aziz lures Yusuf into an intimate relationship of some kind. That scene has been witnessed in one of the stories through ancient Egyptians. Does that mean it's directly linked to those 2 specific characters or not? God only knows. We fast forward to come to the Old Testament. Genesis book had chapters starting from 37 to 46, or even sometimes people would include up to 52, where this chunk deals with the story of Joseph in the Old Testament. You look at the length and you look at Surah Yusuf in Al-Quran, and you find it's almost 3 times longer in the Old Testament, 1/3, only 1/3 in the Quranic one. What does that mean? Does it mean that there were scenes that were edited, that were not mentioned? Certain details? Yes. Quite interesting. The story of Joseph, the story of Yusuf, Quranic Yusuf, focuses on Yusuf most of the time. He is the center of the narrative itself. You look at the Old Testament and you find that his brothers are mentioned. Digression happens through the mainstream of the story itself, where one area talks about one of the brothers who got married and had children and got divorced, etc., and so on. So details related to a brother who is related to Joseph amongst the brothers. And how many did he have? 11, yes. How do we know? The dream. The dream gives those numbers, right? Interpretation of dreams is quite an interesting area when we look at this surah in Al-Quran and we look at the Old Testament version of the narrative itself. It's a very interesting story for humanity in general. Muslims need to showcase what they have by saying, look, this is an extension of monotheistic religions that have taken place historically before Islam emerged as a faith. That doesn't make it lesser than Christianity or Judaism. We talk about, the same message of Al-Hanifiyya that is sent through messengers and prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, alayhim salam ajma'een. And you think about lessons that we could learn. Now, I would like to have this interaction with you. I'm not going to be lecturing, even at uni when I do my job. I like to engage. I don't want to keep talking all the time. I would like you to kind of follow with me the stages that we're going to go through. So if I'm going to go back and forth, it's going to be between the Old Testament mainly and the Quranic version. When I talk about the Quranic version, I might be relying on the meaning that we think we can interpret of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed. Even if it is bilisanin Arabiyyin mubin, and you're speaking to a native Arab with some Indian blood in me, that goes possibly 3 centuries or so, when the story, we're talking about stories tonight, right? When the story started with a small group belonging to a village in the southern part of the Arabian Peninsula, close to Hadramaut, the tribe mainly where that village belongs to, amongst other villages, is Al-Kathiri of Hadramaut, and the branch of that tribe that my ancestors belong to is Bani Bar. Now, when you say Bani in Arabic, what are you talking about? Sons of, children of. Yes. Just like when you say McDonald's, by the way, or O'Connor, right? So it's equivalent, people of. What does bar mean? And don't think in English. Or think in Arabic now. Ya salam. So we talk about bir al-walidain, right? Utmost respect towards parents. So if I describe someone as bar, huwa barun biwalidayh, he is an utmost obedient child towards his parents or her parents. I'm glad to belong to that branch of the tribe of Al-Kathiri called people of Bar. Must have had a great-grandfather who must have been really good towards his parents to coin that, nickname And nicknaming in Arabic culture is quite interestingly, amazingly common, to the extent that if I ask you, what is the name actually of Abu Huraira? Abdul Rahman, right? And the name of Abu Bakr? His dad is Abu Quhafa, which is another nickname. But what's his first name? Abdullah. And isn't it interesting that a reported saying by Prophet Muhammad ﷺ that أحب الأسماء إلى الله, most beloved names to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are Abdullah wa Abdul Rahman. Karimia. So, yeah. Oh, Jazakumullah khair. It's working. I'm not going to stick to the script. It's just for your guideline to go through the slides that might help me not digress a lot. You've asked for a CV, and I'm giving you kind of glimpses of, going back possibly 5 centuries and then moving forward. Trading with the southern part of India, some people moved from the Arabian Peninsula and thought, let's make this our headquarters of trading back and keeping our cousins in Arabia. And we're the lucky ones to stay in this nice, luscious area of the southern part of India. And long-term basis, yes, we could possibly become more capable of purchasing land, having houses, marrying wives, bringing children, and helping people who are in the Arabian Peninsula. Because we belong to the religion of Islam, pilgrims who go to Mecca come back to Khairullah, southern part of India. What is that place called? The Khairullah of India, thinking green meadows all over, nice rain. I mean, Ghaith, we talk about rain, a blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, continuous all the time, nice people there. Why not stay in this spot, which is kind of paradise on earth? Yet, being of faith, have been reported back when pilgrims go back to Mecca and come back and say, shame on you guys, you're enjoying your time here while people in Mecca are in need of some support of some kind. They say, okay, we got the money. No, we don't need your money only. We need manpower as well. So one of the ancestors decided, let's take a group and go back to the Arabian Peninsula and settle in Mecca and be neighbors of Al-Haram, which has become a title for people who come to take abode in that location of Al-Haram and settle there and become people of Mecca. Just like Hajar alayhi salam and Ismail alayhi salam, when they came to a valley with no sign of life, instructed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam took them there. So establishing a Quranic school was amongst the projects that started, and alhamdulillah, I say, it continued up to the kind of early years of the 19th century. And then when that place was announced to be Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, 1934, right? Only 10 years later, that school, that Quranic school that is called Al-Madrasa Al-Meliebary was registered as an official school there, and it continues, alhamdulillah, to be there in Mecca. Now that's my family background. I came to this country in 98 as a postgrad student after I have done some studies in the United States, postgraduate study as well. After I have finished my BA at Al-Qura University in Mecca, and it was in English language teaching, interpretation, translation. So by profession, I should have been a teacher of English to speakers of other languages. When I did some postgraduate study in the States, I have taken interpretation, translation, and comparative lit. And part of the research I have done early days of the late 80s was when I did some kind of comparative way of looking at language, Old English and Classical Arabic. And you think, what is the link? I thought, okay, timing of when Classical Arabic was reaching its peak compared to when Old English was spoken, 7th century to 11th century. looking at grammar of Old English and finding that they had a category of the dual, which we still do in Arabic. All right, ثاني اثنين إذ هما في الغار. It had that in Old English. Old English belongs to the branch of Germanic languages. Germanic languages had certain sounds. Some of them have gone off the radar. Kh is one of them. German still has it. Spanish still has it. So this is the sound system that I thought, striking resemblance. I need to bring that out on paper and show to my professor that I found something. And when she looked at that term paper, as they refer to it, she said, "Are you sure about this?" I said, "I am sure about the Arabic side. You help me. You are the Old English expert." And she said, "This is amazing. This is a breakthrough. We need to do something about it." And it was first ever remark of saying, "This is worthy of publishing." I said, "Oh, great, do something." So along those lines of, having the enjoyable experience of exploring and reading and discovering, then I thought, wait a minute, that was the first word ever that was revealed to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Iqra. And it's not lip service, and it's not mechanical. It has to go between the lines and pondering and so on. So meanings, not just one meaning, of the story of Joseph is something that we need to highlight. You never know breakthroughs that continue to happen once we read and read and read and read and continue to read. And I should commend Dr. Musharraf, Jazahullah Khairan, for setting up this whole place, which happened to be the first place ever we established the Saudi school 20 years ago in, renting 9 rooms, I think, around this area for the weekend school on Saturdays and Sundays. So Iqra, we continue with that message, inshallah. And I am, honored to have a copy of the translation of the meaning of English in plain English that has been published April, May of this year, and is in circulation. And I think it's out of print now and back in, mashallah, mashallah, mashallah. And I think second edition is on its way, so to speak, and so on. So again, this is something that we need to do as much as we can, each in his own expertise and her own field of study, field of specialization, and so on. My area is related to the art of narratives. Is one part of an area that I still study and read about. So when we talk about, in the Bible, I've mentioned in the Old Testament, 3 times long compared to the Quranic version. We talk about the story of Yusuf in the Quran. What about this one, M-A-A-N? What's going on with that? Any idea? I thought it could be kind of catchy, thinking, Bible, Quran, man. But the spelling is not a typo here. Thomas Mann, a German writer who went to Egypt and stayed for about 16 years or so, people say 7 to 16, collecting data and coming up with 1,200 plus pages with the title of Joseph and His Brothers. Right? Very interesting when you think about, you read that, which was really agonizing, but still kind of enjoyable when you do the comparative way of thinking. The Quranic one was the easiest for me to read, of course, and you think for all sorts of reasons, being Muslim, knowing Arabic, being used to listening to that surah day in, day out, etc., and so on, recited by others, including Abdul Basit and all those great people who have, this artistic way of presenting Al-Quran in an oral way, where you listen wherever you are, even if you're driving down the road, and sometimes it will take you places. You should keep your eye on the road, of course, but keep pondering about what you're listening to. This man, named Mr. Mann, received the Nobel Prize for his work. So you talk about a respectful man of letters. His work has been translated from German to English and other translations. Arabic is still in the making, so it is in the oven, right? And chapters 37 to 50, people say 51, right, of the Old Testament. What is 12? Surah 12, which is? Yusuf. And what is 4? Yes, exactly. Think about as if we're talking about 4 parts, 4 volumes, right? Well, if you look at the globe and we talk about, I've mentioned ancient Egyptians and how, 1500 years BC, similar scenes to the story have been found and documented that they existed as a version of the story. Thomas Manns. And if I say Al-Abd al-Faqir, tried thinking I'm going to capture those ideas that I'm writing after reading about. And alhamdulillah, 2012, I published a book related to telling and retelling the story of Joseph. Looking at it from a literary side, where the reason I choose a story like this, not only because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أحسن القصص, but also because if I go through scholarship that is written in the Western world, they say that it's a masterpiece, they say that it's most popular, they say that it discusses, Joseph in such a literary, captivating style, but they're talking about the version that they have read in the Old Testament. When I had a chance to do some research of my work, it had to be peer-reviewed and it had to be refereed and so on. Someone with the name of Paul Simpson, who was a professor at Queen's Mary, replied in an email with 2 lines by saying, shame on you Muslims having this treasure chest and not bringing it out so that we enjoy it, not just think about the Old Testament. And that made me think we have a long way to go, but we have to have a starting point. And I think, inshallah, that starting point has already happened. We need to just continue working diligently. Now, interestingly enough, when you think about the opening of the story, it's quite unique in the Quran. The first part is quite the coding type of giving you letters that are there. And so many justifications, interpretations, schools of thought that talk about, when I read Al-Baqarah, it starts with that. When I read Surah Yusuf, it starts with that. And then we move forward with an opening line of this story that was revealed when Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was in Mecca or Medina? In Mecca. During difficult times, to the extent that that year when this surah was revealed was referred to as Am al-Huzn, year of sorrow. Why? Yes. So Sayyidah Khadija radiyallahu anha passed away. Now Sayyidah Khadija, not just a major character, we're talking about a partner who gave support when everyone around were kind of questioning, except for Abu Bakr radiyallahu anhu. But we're talking about, the lady in Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's life. And when you think about, acknowledging our significant others, our better halves, Hajar is commemorated when we do sa'i. Now, this is really interesting. We need to bring that out to anyone who would like to know more about our faith of peace, which is very fair towards man and woman as human beings, complementing one another, not competing against one another, not thinking one is better than the other. Each has their own role in life, and they help one another become better human beings so that they can bring up better human beings and generations after generations leading the world, which has happened when this part of the world suffered from what is referred to as the Dark Ages, right? Now, I'm not going to go through theory of narratology and fiction and so on, so I'm going to skip to think about, how the opening lines, comparing chapter 37 and Surah 12, it starts with Jacob and tells you about his father, and then moves to Joseph. While here, it goes right away into the main character of the story itself. And it continues focusing on the main character of the story itself. Now, doing some kind of comparative way of going back and forth in terms of the text that I have for translation of the Old Testament, because it wasn't written in English originally, and translation of the meaning of the Quran, which was written originally in Arabic, was revealed in Arabic and documented in Arabic. And when documented in Arabic, we go into very interesting areas where even in writing those characters in Arabic, history of writing in Arabic went through stages where, can you imagine, there were no short vowel markers of fatha, kasra, dhamma, sukoon, tanween, shadda, madda, nothing of that sort that would guide you to read the word as bayt or bint, because there were no dots either. So can you imagine, you're talking about just three shapes of waves connected to one another, and an Arab would look and say, yeah, that's bayt. I say, no, that's bint. Heavily relying on context, thinking writing is very restricted. We don't need things on paper or leather parchments or leaves of trees or whatever writing instruments they had at that time. It was the word of honor. It was an oral society. So when we talk about a narrative, we talk about storytelling as an art. And during Prophet Muhammad's time, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when Quran was being revealed, Sahaba were also documenting what Prophet Muhammad would say, explanatory notes of how many times do we pray per day, what do we do in each of those prayers, and so on. Details complementing what is being revealed, but very limited reproduction of what's being said. And this tells us something about how flexible things can be when reading the Quran allows for certain intricate features of dialects of some tribes around that area. You go to Kuwait and part of their dialect, if I am going to talk to my sister Lena, I would say, كيف حالش? So what have I done in terms of the last character there? I've changed the kaf, كيف حالك, to sheen. And when you hear it first time, think, oh, come on, are you really native Arabic? What's going on? Is it the Farsi influence of that? Or no, it's part of the dialect that is there, to the extent that you read the story of Maryam in Surah Maryam, قَدْ جَعَلَ رَبُّكِ تَحْتَكِ سَرِيًّا to be acceptable as one of the versions that you are allowed to read the Quran in that way. But it's not so elastic that you can be choosy and picky and do whatever you want with it. No, it has been approved by Prophet Muhammad ﷺ as a variation of reading the Quran in that way. إن جاءكم فاسق بنبأ فتبينوا. That's one reading of it. Think فتبينوا with no dots would be possibility as another reading فتثبتوا. And it's just the dotting system. Why am I talking about this? I'm talking about how these words of the messages that were articulated verbally were put in paper. Same goes when you're telling a story. How much are you going to be capturing in terms of what's being told by the narrator? Are you going to say, and his face changed when he started telling the story of that scene when Joseph was in a setting of temptation of some kind? We're talking about emotions here. Are they going to be captured or not? When we talk about interpretation and translation of something to a target language of some kind, there is that phrase that it will always have what is referred to as lost in translation. Yes? It will never ever be capable of conveying a message from a language to another. Even within the same language, if you talk about a synonymous variation of two words, I say, Dear Atif, if I choose the word that I think I'm a learner of English, I'm doing okay in communicating in the language, I know that synonym to dear, when I go F7 for Microsoft Word, it gives me that list, and I want to beef up the way I would write the letter and sound posh maybe, precious Atif. Would that be acceptable? People think, okay, well, precious and dear, expensive, even worse. It doesn't go into that context. But then, point of argument is, these are synonymous, these are synonyms. Yet, each word would be fitting one context. You talk about a narrative. Each word Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed goes into that context. When I interpret, I might be capturing one side of that context in the target language. So when we talk about elegance, we think, okay, the style here is capturing as much as possible when you talk about, again, limited sides of what the text says. Now, another interesting shape of the story itself, striking resemblance, irrespective of the length. I'm looking at the clock there and I'm just thinking time frame, because if you let me continue as I do, we will go beyond midnight or whatever. So you let me, what is the format, so to speak?
Another 30 minutes, 8:45.
Okay, if you bear with me, would that be all right? Okay, Jazakumullah khair. When we look at the shape of the story itself, I have used letters to go for stages A, B, C, D, E, F. Exactly the same procedure of progress from one scene to another, from one part to another, for both stories. Striking structure. Then it's reversed back to F, D, C, B, A. It starts with Joseph not being there, of course. The dream is a theme where it starts and it finishes with fulfillment of dream. Right? Now, in the dream itself, volumes and volumes could be written. We talk about interpretation of dreams, we talk about symbolic language, we talk about, even Freudian theory, when we talk about psychoanalytical ways of what people see or imagine. Is it daydreaming? I mean, were they really given some kind of glimpse of similar to revelation, but not as when we talk about Quranic, because seal of Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam stopped al-wahy in that format and that form. So the form of the narrative itself across the two scriptures is again very interestingly similar. Now, I have come up with a model for analysis which got me a little bit worried myself. How dare I apply a theory of a mere human being to something that is the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And I thought, okay, let me go along with that theory that is linked to an objective way of analyzing text. So they say. Okay? Short and Leach, two professors who came up with a theory of speech and thought presentation. Remember, we're not talking about text on paper. We're talking about speech and thought as well. So when we read something that has been mentioned, Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, and then the narrator would say, and he moved forward to sit up and set up the scene for something serious that he's going to say to his companions. So body language was included, and narrators used to capture that and explain. When Prophet Muhammad ﷺ finished Eid prayers in Medina, and so the ladies there attending Eid prayers, in a joking manner said to them, "You're here, I could see all jewelry," and I'm by the way just going for the meaning of what has been said by Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. You know, lots of gold there, lots of money. Pay to charity. You're going to be more than men in that place if you don't be careful and give to charity. In a joking manner. It was Eid day. When people read those lines that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ addressed the ladies who attended Eid prayers and said to them, majority of you are going to be in hell, you have this money that you need to pay to charity, so do it. The sound is entirely different. The way addressing them is entirely different. When in joking way I say to my daughter, for example, I'm going to kill you. And I'm laughing because this is exactly what has happened this October. I was on the M1 going for a meeting in London, and I receive a phone call. Okay, hands-free, I'm a safe driver. And she says, "Dad, we're going to have a video call now. So you have to stop what you're doing. If you're driving, I know you're driving, you told us you're going to London and so on. Pull over." And I said, "Come on, I can't just pull over. You know, I need to have the resting area, which is going to be 10 miles from here. What's going on? You got me worried." She said, No, nothing to worry about. Just next rest area, give us a call." I said, "Fine, I hope everything is all right." It was 10 miles. I pulled over and I just called FaceTime and camera was there. And lo and behold, all my kids who are in Saudi Arabia were gathered, and there was a cake with candles on top, and they were saying, "Happy birthday, Dad," capturing the moment. I responded by saying, "I'm going to kill you." Now, if that is taken by someone who's listening in this part of the world, I will be talking to social services the next day, or even a higher authority. Just taken out of context. How can we capture that expression in that way? This is what we need to understand when we talk about sayings of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And this is what we need to study when we talk about interpretation of the meaning of the Quran in so many angles and sides. I go back to the model that I have designed as part of the theory, based on that theory. So when you see A is for an act, S for speech, and I haven't included T for thought. I thought I'll just go for an act that has been described and a speech that has been said, documented. Designed a scale that goes for how the narrator is going to give me freedom as a reader to ponder about text. And how restricted can that narrator be? Just because I read a lot about what people say about the Quran, as you know, my brother Atif has mentioned, people mention the structure of the surahs and whether it's disfragmented or is there logic behind it or whatever. You need to study science in order to know, putting one chemical on top of another might do an explosion or the other way around. If you don't do that, ignorance is never a bliss. It might lead to disaster. So when you talk about narrator's control, what do you think my impression was before I even conducted this experiment and did this survey of the two texts of the Bible and the Quran, the Old Testament and the Quran, for the story of Joseph? Which one do you think that would come to mind in terms of which one is more controlling as a message? I thought it was the Quran, right? Giving me specific instructions, right? Usually very clear. Some areas might be debatable for interpretation. Hence, we have schools of thought and we have scholars still working on different meanings of certain verses. So I thought, okay, I'm going to be safe in kind of reflecting upon and reassuring readers that that's the nature of the message itself, revealed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It was a total surprise when the percentage of in total control higher, almost half. The Quran gave more freedom. How did I do the analysis? It is to go through the phrases and use them. Oh, sorry. I said to you I'm going to be sat most of the time, but I hope. Total, is it okay here or here? Yeah. I think might be there. Freedom was more in the Quranic side. Those phrases were classified across that scale of narrative reported act, narrative reported speech and act, indirect speech, and so on. Those types of phrases that, with help of two colleagues who were native speakers of English, because I was working on translation of the biblical and the Quranic into English. I've chosen Marmaduke Pictols because it has the literary side more, and King James Version of the Bible for the Old Testament, just for the sake of thinking, bringing the two closer to one another in terms of the genre, the literary stylistic side of things. That was quite a surprise. Then we moved to narrator in partial control. Again, you think about the Quran, 47, where the biblical one was 31%. Partial control. Then when you talk about not in control at all, which one is higher? Quran. 11%. Quran gave more room for people to maneuver and think about. And I thought, I'm suspecting myself, I might have done something as being Muslim, being an Arab, etc. and so on, skewing those results. And hence comes Paul Simpson, who was refereeing the work, looking at the way I have done the phrases and their classifications, the way I have put each of those phrases to be reflected in figures, and then percentages that were there. He was struck as much as I was. So So there is still work to be done when you talk about, other narratives of the Quran that might have appeared either biblical or any other script that we could, access. So again, when we talk about comparing the style, Quranic style is quite interesting. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ has been accused as being a poet. He wasn't. And Arabs at that time knew that, this script that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is talking about doesn't belong to a genre we are familiar with. It's so elegant, so eloquent, yet it's not poetry. But he could be a poet doing this in a new way of doing it. But it's kind of prose, but it's not prose either. The biblical side is mainly in prose, where the Quranic one, we have come up as, when you think about, we talk about, people doing research on this, as quasi-poetic. We can't say that it is total poetry that's there. It's very interesting. At the time when the Quran was revealed, the types of poetry that were circulated, so to speak, were so meticulously structured in what were referred to as buhur al-shi'r. So we talk about, 15 of them, and then number 16 was added later, so to speak. In such a meticulous way of looking at a pattern of a poem and choosing one to be the best on an annual basis through a conference. When I talk about this to my students, I say, can you imagine X Factor happening 15 centuries in that part of the world? And Simon Cowell or whoever would be part of the panel, listening to people coming with their poetry and saying, winner of the year, and we're going to have your work done, reproduced in script, where we're going to be using the best leather parchments with ink that is gold water based, so to speak. Now people argue the point whether they were hung on the walls of Al-Kaaba or not. This is argumentative, and Taha Hussein comes with this theory of saying it might not have been the case, and those Arabs are nostalgic and like to make up things, and these pieces of poetry have been written even later, and then people thought that it belonged to pre-Islamic era, etc. But there is a point of argument there for and against, so to speak, because when we talk about how Hassan ibn Thabit started writing poetry, and how when we talk about poetry, when Islamic era started, certain themes were not accepted to be circulated anymore because they were taboo topics that were haram to deal with. For example, describing a naked woman's body was something that was banned, and you can't do that as a poet. Poets used to do that, and some of them would even hide in areas where those young girls would come and get water from their wells and so on, and they would just get those scenes where maybe water would come for wet t-shirt contests, etc. Think about these scenes were there, and people wrote poetry about it, or came up with poetry, and it was part of production of literature in Arabic in that part of the world in that era. Islam comes about and says, there is a list of do's and don'ts, and from this moment onward, we're going to allow for this, and we're going to censor, we're going to edit, we're going to do things for your sake as human beings, because you're crazy when you're crazy. Right? It's quite interesting when you think about that. Now, again, when we go back and forth discussing how similar or how different, some scholars, unfortunately, came up with this idea of one is the original, and that is the one in the Old Testament, and one is derived out of it. It is an unfortunate way when this is highlighted in that way of thinking. There is an original, and there is, if I have an iPhone that I paid only £50, you would expect made in China, is it? Fake. So an original compared to not so original, so to speak, right? So you talk about, Rolex watches, they say replica. rather than saying fake Rolex, right? So again, playing with words in terms of less expensive, but it's not the original. So it gives value when you say that's the original version of it. But as people doing research, it's very interesting when you go for the original and you do not find details that you find in the derivative version. And that is exactly how the two versions complement one another. Okay, there are certain scenes that are put in a concise, compact manner in the Quran. More details are given here. It's just like when you think about extension of the Quran in one way of an analogy by reading Sunnah and finding that, details of 5 daily prayers cannot be found in the 114 surahs of the Quran. It doesn't mention that you have rak'atayn in al-fajr, etc. Right? So complementing one another when you think, and as Muslims, we believe that this is the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Bible is. Irrespective of how much distortion has happened, how much editing has taken place, etc. and so on. Right? Moving forward, I think I'm going to skip. I think I'll just go over, is there an original version or not? I have covered that point. The relationship between the two texts, when you think about, the two texts are of two different purposes given. And therefore, when I am texting on WhatsApp, usually it's informal. I wouldn't be using certain words that I would use if I'm sending a formal email. Well, this has come from Ahmed. And people look at it and say, yeah, this is on WhatsApp. That's why he's just using those abbreviations or even going for you as just one character, etc. and so on, right? Because we talk about different purposes. So these two texts that we believe are revelations from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have different purposes, so to speak, right? They are of a different nature. Now, how can we compare them? We go back to the stylistic way of looking at the text. Maybe if people who would become experts in the original languages, being Arabic, Quranic Arabic, and I say Quranic Arabic, highlighting that it's not like any kind of Arabic, because again, I talked about history of writing in Arabic very briefly by saying, it started with those lines, then tashkil was added where shodba markers were provided, and then tanqit was added, and you pick up a version of the Quran in Morocco and you find al-qaf doesn't have 2 dots on top. So again, for tanqit, it wasn't even one standard. There were other schools, if you like. That goes to the history of writing in Arabic, let alone when you talk about beyond rendering scripture on paper or whatever writing instrument that you have. The two stories have complementing shapes to one another. So the biblical one flows one stage to another, but then digresses, while the Quranic one focuses on events that are happening where the center of those events will always be Yusuf in his presence in an interesting way. Where is Yusuf present when the king says, I have seen this dream, I've had this dream, and talking to his people? Joseph is mentioned when someone says, I know who could help you with the interpretation. So Joseph is a parent there, directly or indirectly, explicitly or implicitly. It's always about Joseph who's there. Now, the characters, again, is quite an interesting area when you look at the two narratives. In the biblical story, when Joseph reports back to Jacob, Yaqub alayhi salam, his father, telling him about the dream he has seen, the way he reacts is quite interesting. In the Quran, dad is worried about, yes, sibling rivalry,
Yep.
right? So he says, don't tell anyone about it,
Don't tell your
right?
brothers.
Yes, specifically your brothers, right? Now in the biblical one, as if, and I'm not quoting, I'm kind of interpreting, who do you think you are? Telling me about a dream like this. I mean, the sun, the moon, stars, etc., bowing. Get out of here. It's that attitude. Very interesting when you think of it. It's quite interesting. But then if I look at biblical studies conducted by biblical experts of faith or no faith, and when I say of faith, that could be Christianity, Judaism, Islam, or no faith at all, you read about Dawood alayhi salam and you think, I don't want to read that. I don't want to be even quote reading it. It's a lot worse than being caught reading 1001 Nights. And you're familiar with the 1001 Nights, kind of, right? It's quite interesting when you think about that. Originally was not written in Arabic, it was translated into Arabic. So lost in translation were quite a lot of scenes, thank God. But then amongst those scenes that were captured might have been censored easily, taboo scenes that were there. Now, a lot of the prophets in the Old Testament and the New Testament mentioned have some kind of biography that you think, no, these can't be the chosen ones. You're talking about chosen ones are specially chosen for their character, not having 900 wives or whatever. We think about stories that have been pegged to one prophet or another. Nastaghfirullah al-azim fi dhalik. I think going to wrap by talking about the stylistic feature of both these works still capture, even when you talk about translations. It's funny when you think about a drink, if the flavor is very good, no matter how much you dilute it with water, it would still have some kind of taste taking you back to the original flavor. Maybe 3 sips in a row will kind of get you a little bit of the portion of the flavor itself. Interpretations are kind of dilution of the text itself. But if the text itself has that flavor that is there, it will always be existing there, no matter how it gets diluted, so to speak, through human error, human efforts in trying to capture, a meaning. And I say a meaning because if you talk about a phrase that is there, or even a word, language is such a very fascinating phenomenon that we use for communication, but we also charge words with certain emotions that sometimes on paper we can't see those emotions if they're not explained, as when you talk about acts or speeches that are detailed on how he has said that word and what was he doing. Was he sat? Was he standing up? Was he lying down? Was he smiling? Was he crying? All sorts of emotions that are there that will enhance the meaning for such words. Now, the word great is one of my interesting words when I think in English. Someone says, you have invited me over to go to London tomorrow. I think I can manage now and I could accompany you. I say, great. I'm not going to be driving alone. Even if my kids call me and say, we're going to have a surprise for you. Nice company. Now, if someone says, they say that it's going to go -5 tomorrow. I say, great. It's the same word, right? But then the emotions that I use in just the intonation, there is more to language that we go, as we refer to in scientific terms, paralinguistic features that we use when we communicate with one another. Body gestures are quite interesting things. Only last week, I contributed to a workshop on campus when we talk about body gestures across languages. My Italian colleague said, Ahmed, you're going to do an act, I'm going to do an act. And we let the audience decide with no words what is going on, right? So amongst those gestures is something that you might be familiar with. My colleague went like this. If you've been to Italy or you've... Definitely not, definitely not. As if, what's wrong with you is the mildest way to put it. I grew up when my mom would use this all the time.
Wait till they go.
That is one, right? Another?
Wait a minute.
Mom, it's very hot. Just give it a couple of minutes and then you're going to enjoy it. Be patient. Language universals? No. We have to work at better interpretations. I think I'll stop now. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله العظيم الجليل لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين من كل ذنب فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. We can open the floor for comments, discussions, etc.
Dr. Ahmed, anyone has any questions?
Please. He is no, you're the chair for the session. جزاكم الله خير.
Without diminishing the hard work that you put into tremendous amount of work that you put into this language, how vast it is. A thought has come across to me while I was listening to you that you've chosen the Bible and the Quran. What about incorporating Torah? No, the work it would be even more vast, but wouldn't that bring it more together?
The Old Testament is the Torah.
Oh, right.
Yes, and sometimes terminology. Terminology is no. You're right when you think about we think in scientific terms, Torah is not referred to as a scripture, so to speak. So people talk about the old and the new, and both are kind of integrated into the Bible. For a purpose, they have done that, right? And we need to kind of live up to the scholarship only because we didn't do the standards of how we conduct.
If the Hebrew version, wouldn't that be?
It wasn't even Hebrew, it was Aramaic. So we go even further before, yes. So another version of a language that adds a layer of difficulty.
Yeah, two questions here about because you studied the two versions. What about the ending? It's Zalicha, the wife of Aziz, married Joseph in the Bible, or where does that come from?
Interestingly enough, another interpretation. It's not mentioned directly. So again, we talk about explicit versus implicit, where a person interprets that and they lived happily ever after. Who did? Right? As if giving you a glimpse of saying, I'm not telling you anymore.
So it's not being explained, just like left open ending, like in the Quran.
Not very open, but it doesn't literally say to you, the two got married.
And the other point is, what about Hamma biha and Hammat bihi? Is that, which is as well open to interpretation?
Very much so. And quite interesting when you think about the verb in Arabic. Very simple, lexical side of the verb hamma, right? Multi shades of meanings. We use it daily in terms of wala yahimmak. Don't you ever worry about it. So it goes on a scale of just worrying about something as one shade of meaning, or intending to do it. And that's where, again, interpreters have been going back and forth thinking, if we are going to bring in what we believe in as al-isma.
Yeah. So what the other version said, the Bible said about this point.
It doesn't use the same language.
All right, so they didn't come.
So unfortunately, sometimes you would love to have my analogy if the interpretation of the English version uses the same verbs. I have done the vocabulary similarity in the book itself, where kind of three parts of a chapter that deals with vocabulary items, choice of words across the two versions. But these choice of words were human factor choice of words. Interpreters have thought, I'm going to say, and he had some worry about it, as one person would go. Another would say he had some intentions to go along with the invitation of whatever.
The asma itself which stopped him from continuing.
Yes. لولا أن رأى برهان ربه. People interpret that in many aspects, including that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has asked Jibreel alayhi salam to come as a block between the two of them. How much you think authentication can play a role in this is a very interesting area that is worth exploring. We have been instructed by Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he said, حدثوا عن بني إسرائيل ولا حرج. As long as you're not basing what has happened during Bani Israel's time and reported to you as people of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, no harm in kind of chatting about stories related to Bani Israel and so on. But you're not going to take quotation by saying Dhuhr prayer is going to be 5 rak'ah because Bani Israel have done it that way and they said Muslims should do and so on. So it has nothing directly affecting our aqidah or our arkan in the least part. But if it tells stories related to the character of Joseph that we have, no harm. But then if we look at Dawood alayhi salam and how he is tackled in the biblical version of it, we have to take it with a lot of grains of salt, not just a grain of salt, so to speak, only because the way representation of those special characters was strikingly rude and obscene and distasteful at all. So that is something that we need to put in context again. People have already started criticizing the Bible for this. Some, again, as I said, of faith or no faith. Now, it might be relevant for me as a Muslim to say, this is definitely not the part that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would reveal about Dawood alayhi salam or Sulaiman alayhi salam or any of those characters, even Lut and the story of his daughters. Some details about it in terms of the daughters led their dad to get drunk and copulate so that they have children. What is going on here?
Can I ask this?
Yeah.
Because you took a certain version of Bible, you said, would your findings be, you think, would be very different if you...
Most likely. Most likely. If I do an extension of the work itself and take interpretation of the Quran in plain English, the language used by Dr. Musharraf is going to kind of gear me towards possibility of different results.
So that's openness or restriction?
Very much so. Very much so. Exactly.
The
text
that you chose is not like...
And it's funny, when I chose it, it was on the basis of not knowing the results before that. It was just thinking both had resemblance in their literary stylistic features. And therefore, I thought, okay, I'm comparing apples with apples, one way or another, green versus red, but not apples with pears, for example. But then, if it's going to be in plain English, I have to look at a version of the Bible in plain English, which does exist, by the way. Very simple and to the point and written in a way that it is accessible. So again, I'm glad to see that we have now versions of meanings of the Quran in that style, where younger generations would find it accessible and enjoyable to read. I've mentioned the script in the Quran when it was written, and I said Quranic Arabic. The spelling system that is utilized for Quranic Arabic is not the conventional spelling system that we use on a daily basis when we write in Arabic. So you read as-salah and you find there is a waw there, right? And sometimes you read there is a small alif that's there that's being kind of added on. Yes? I don't see harm in utilization of whatever we can get our hands on for an app, for whatever way where we can enhance better recitation, better tajweed implementation, and so on. It has already been done, when color coding started to be integrated in, tajweed, where you see the color that tells you this is idgham all the time, or idgham bighunna, or idgham bighir ghunna, etc. and so on. This is something that we need to upgrade the presentation so that younger generations using those gadgets would be able to, waking up in the morning, praying Fajr, go over and just click on an app and look at it and read, easily. The way it has been done in this version of, the interpretation in plain English, I think struck me as what we refer to as mind mapping. So you have thematic presentation of a surah as an introductory part, easing you into what to expect when you read the script. When you read the script, again, explanatory points are there, and notes, footnotes, etc. enhance your understanding in a good way. So we need more work like this. Again, accessibility to interpretations that we need to possibly update. And these interpretations of the Quran, of As-Suyuti or Al-Jalalain or Ibn Kathir or any of those great scholars, it still is human production. And that doesn't mean that we should stop and say, As-Suyuti says this, so we cannot say anything else. You've got language there, you can work on it and find ways. I mean, with Dr. Musharraf on the night of the lecture of Ibn Taymiyyah on campus of the University of Nottingham, we had this discussion with another colleague coming from Ash-Shariqa University who specialized in Quranic studies. And she was saying, look, we need to look further into another reading of وَاللَّاتِي تَخَافُونَ نُشُوزَهُنَّ فَعِظُوهُنَّ وَاهْجُرُوهُنَّ وَاضْرِبُوهُنَّ. She said, look, we need to look at meaning of the Quran that fits 2018 regulations in United Arab Emirates. That's where she works. And it's a valid point of looking at it so that we can live the Quran and live by the Quran in the way that we think Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not ordering us to do so. And Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has been reported to never ever abuse anyone, let alone his beloved wives. He was asked in the presence of all men, and you talk about a male dominant society there, who is most beloved one to your heart? He replied by saying, Aisha. The person who asked smiled and said, I meant of men, her father. Subhanallah, you can imagine. A mercy to mankind, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was never ever abused the wife. When he hit by mistake one companion only because he was straightening the lines, we're talking about battlefield here, and we're talking about commander-in-chief holding, a stick, right? And just going like this for people to align. And this companion was a little bit to the front. Again, in a joking manner, he said, Awja'tani ya Rasulullah. You caused pain, Rasulullah, with that stick, hitting this side. What did Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam do? Quite interesting. He said, then take revenge. Now, all companions were thinking, what is going to happen now? We hope that this person is, kind enough to mercy to mankind. What was the reaction? Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam even revealed the area where is to be, kind of struck, if you like, beaten. I mean, we could use so many words when you think in English, charged with things that hit. I mean, the scale goes from really bad meaning of, breaking a bone to, kind of poking as we do now in Facebook. We talk about, think about, the phrase or the expression. What did the companion do? Kissed him on that place, justifying by saying, we're going to go into battlefield now. Going into battle means I might die and get shahada, and I would love it that the last thing I would have ever done is to have my lips kissing your body, alayhi salatu wasalam. These were the companions of this man who is mercy to mankind, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. We still go to the manager thinking, what?
Just a couple of questions. With regard to exegesis of the Quran,
Yes.
it's supposed to be progressive anyway, so
Yes.
you would hope that
Thank you.
somebody-
Yes.
somebody would be these days studying and bringing it to
Yes.
the modern audience.
Yes.
But with regard to Yusuf alayhi salam and his
Zulaykha.
Zulaykha, there is exegesis on that saying that when she was very old, they met up again. And I've read this somewhere in one of the tafasirs to say that and she's still heavily in love with him. And I don't know if it's exegesis or a rawaya that she...
A good addition you have. That's exactly where we go again. What is the primary source and what is the reference that this idea is based on? When I read the Quran, I cannot find anything that tells me anything beyond.
Yeah. Have you heard that then?
Yes. And that's, again, quite an interesting area when you think, that's exactly why I mentioned to you when Prophet Muhammad ﷺ says, حَدِّثُوا عَنْ بَنِي إِسْرَائِيل وَلَا حَرَجٍ. And even the verb حَدِّثُوا is related to hadith, and hadith is just speech. It's narrating. It will not affect the main essence of your beliefs. If they say whatever they say about Yaqub or Dawood or anyone, you just say, unfortunately in the Bible, it mentions that this way was the conversation between Joseph and his dad. And again, there is the artifact of the multicolor coat.
Oh, yeah.
Yes? Yeah. Quite interesting when you think about, Andrew Lloyd Webber still has a musical, I think, that runs in London. And usually around Christmas time, now they have special tickets and so on. I have attended it 3 times. And I thought, well, it's another retelling, if you like. Yeah, it's a third retelling that's there. For think about, musical theater production, artifacts need to be taken into consideration. What is interesting when you think about interpretations of these scenes and so on, people talk about experiments related to science sometimes, linked to certain ayat of the Quran. Qamis Yusuf as an artifact. Towards the end of the story, when Yaqub alayhi salam goes blind, it becomes treatment for him to regain vision. An Egyptian ophthalmologist did some analysis related to when someone loses vision, becomes blind, because they have lost a dear person. Anything to do with that dear person might reprogram the mind so the senses restore their strength. So he says there is this possibility that maybe nowadays we talk about DNA that is there within the coat or the shirt, if you like. He says that is a possibility, scientifically speaking. Now, how much can we take out of that is quite another interesting area. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask, with regard to your study of the Surah Yusuf, and with regard to ring structure, did you find that it existed within Surah Yusuf? It existed in Surah Yusuf.
What did I?
With regard to the ring structure regarding analysis of.
That is exactly when I gave you the shape of A, B, C, D, E, F, and then that is how it goes in that nice circle of where it starts, it finishes. But quite interesting, in the middle, that's where the 2 points are repeated.
Yes. that the same for the Old Testament?
Both, quite strikingly interesting, go into these stages. One stage could be here, 3 pages, but half a page here, but still is that theme,
Yeah.
moving from one to the other.